been significant freeholders and landholders of the name O'Madden, some of whom may have been eligible for the chieftaincy, and some of whom would have been distanced from it by several generations and wouldn't be eligible. So it's not true to say that every single member, because your name was O'Madden, you'd be eligible to be chieftain. It was unthinkable in those days. Only if you were a member of that ruling branch or a rival branch of recent descent from a chieftain were you eligible to be chieftain. So you'd have strong branches of the O'Maddens, like for instance the O'Maddens of Derryhiney, who I think their chieftain, they may have held the chieftaincy at the late, I would say possibly in the late 15th century. So they were still strong members of strong individuals within the territory, but they certainly wouldn't have been eligible for the chieftaincy by the mid 1500s, we'll say. As well as those senior members of the O'Maddens, you had several other families, such as the Larkins, Horans, Tracy, Coolahans. They were all other families within that territory that owed allegiance and customs and dues to the then chieftain also. Some of them would have had different functions. You'll see a family there by the name of Callanan in very small letters. That Callanan family would have served as the physicians to the O'Madden chieftain, and they lived in a place called Grange in the parish of Fatty in the middle of the territory, and their lands, in actual fact, we suspect may have been part of the lands attached to the chieftain, and they held that then actually as a hereditary office. In the same way, we don't know, we believe the Horans were probably the principal family within the territory other than the O'Maddens, and they may have held a function in relation to the inauguration of the chieftain, only by virtue of the fact that within their territory there's a townland by the name of Tulnalicki, which may suggest that may have been the inauguration site, but we don't know that for sure. So, this individual here we've highlighted in red is the individual we're starting with today. That individual, Donal of Longford, he became chieftain about 1566, 1567. And he was what we would regard now as the last chieftain of the O'Maddens. Now you'll see that he comes from an extended family there. Anyone within that extended family would have been eligible to be chieftain under Gaelic law. There was also rival branches other than his who also sought that chieftaincy. And you will see his father John there was killed in 1556. You'll see his uncle Malachlan MacBrazel was killed in 1544. They were killed by other O'Maddens of a rival branch. You'll see also, let me see now, there's several others, the members you'll see there killed. They were killed principally by other O'Maddens in seeking to attain the chieftaincy and internal warfare. So Donal O'Madden, son and nephew of previous chieftains, he rises to power after killing the then chieftain Hugh O'Madden of a rival branch in 1567. Now Donal aligned himself with the crown in an effort to secure his precarious position within the territory. He was charged under English law with the murder, but a committee made up of the Bishop of Clonfert and the diocesan clergy declared him not guilty, and the crown recognised him then as captain of his nation in that same year. Now it suited him because by aligning himself with the Crown of England were beginning to get stronger and extend their power from Dublin across the country from the mid-1500s. And by this period, they could certainly provide a certain amount of, we'll say, soldiery and other resources to a chieftain. And you will find Donal certainly wasn't the first member of the O'Maddens to align himself with the crown in an effort to secure the chieftaincy or to stay in his position. So sometime thereafter, once he became chieftain, he came to occupy Longford Castle in the parish of Tirnaskra. And Donal was in power for quite some time. Now, during that period, 1585, there was a very important treaty, or a very important, agreement reached between the Crown and the principal landholders of County Galway and in Connacht, whereby those Gaelic landholders agreed to accept English laws of inheritance and do away with Gaelic law. There was certain incentives for them, certainly the most powerful individuals, there was incentives for them. In particular, Donal, he was the chieftain, and he held some of the richest lands in the territory by virtue of being chieftain. But once he died, other stronger members of rival branches could be eligible to have those lands. Whoever was strongest wouldn't necessarily stay within his branch, or certainly wouldn't necessarily pass to his eldest son or any of his sons. But by accepting English law, what was formerly the lands attached to the chieftaincy and regarded as, we call it, family lands, or for lack of a better word, clan lands, they then became his personal property of inheritance and would stay within his immediate family. So there was certainly a huge benefit from his point of view. There was also a benefit from other minor landholders, because it gave them a certain degree of security from what were regarded as fairly onerous exactions that were imposed by Gaelic chieftains on other members of their own family and on more servile families within the territory. But of course, whatever chieftain and whoever accepted this was faced with huge opposition within the O Maddens because of other members of those, we'll say, ruling branches who have been eligible for the chieftaincy under Gaelic law. They were immediately being disenfranchised, actually disadvantaged. So whilst Donal and several other members of the Maddens accepted this, it caused a great deal of strife that continued into the early 1600s among the O Maddens. And the same thing happened in numerous other Gaelic territories throughout this period. So basically, he was in possession of the lands attached to the chieftaincy. Those lands were recognised as his under English law, and they would be inherited by his eldest son, and so forth. And the same agreement ensured that the Gaelic office of chieftain was abolished. And here we have, we'll say, a family tree showing the descent from Donal O'Madden, the last chieftain. You'll see he had 4 sons: Ambrose, Malachlin, Hugh, Donal. In their time, Ambrose and Malachlin were probably the most powerful. Hugh died before his father. But we're going to follow, you see the area outlined in red? We're going to follow that line, the most senior line actually, is descended from his eldest son Ambrose. We're going to skip ahead to John there, grandson of Donal. He, of course, by virtue of the fact that they were now family lands, he lived in Longford Castle. He was living in 1641. He was obviously one of the most significant landholders in the territory. During an Irish uprising of dissatisfied Catholic landholders in 1641, John was prominent in raiding within the territory the lands of new English settlers at that time. But the uprising of 1641 and the subsequent conflict that continued for a while afterwards came to an end by the rise of the Cromwellians. And when the Cromwellians came to power in the 1650s, a large amount of Catholic landholders they lost their lands effectively. Their lands were confiscated, and John, his land, like so many others, his estate was also confiscated, and he was allocated lands of a lesser value over in the parish of Killordan within the territory, within what was the ancestral territory of the O'Maddens, around a townland known as Ballinamrana, which is, if you anglicise that, means effectively the town of the Welshmen, or as known now as Walshtown. So he was transplanted to an estate of much lesser value in this parish of Killordan. And despite what some accounts say that the O'Maddens continued in Longford Castle for quite some time afterwards, that effectively was the end of the O'Madden association with Longford Castle. You'll see his eldest son is given as Daniel. The descent from each succeeding generation to this Daniel O'Madden in 1708 was recorded by an antiquarian by the name of Roger O'Farrell. And he listed in his genealogical work Linea Antiqua. So that line of descent, that work ends in Daniel. We know actually from other work by other historians that the generations from Daniel up to 1902 were recorded by the famous historian and antiquarian John O'Donovan in his 1830s Tribes and Customs of Hymany. And another member of the Madden family, Thomas Moore Madden, in 1902, he continues the line up to that period in an article for a historical journal. So we have the head of the family, 1708, Daniel, and his son, Brazil. His will was dated 1745. So if we look at that Brazil then, his father, Daniel, succeeded by his eldest son, Brazil. Brazil was described by some historians as of Aircourt and Meelick, and he's also given as Aircourt Castle. But both of those are erroneous. when John O'Donovan read a copy of the will of Brazil, it shows that the will mentioned his eldest son and his two other sons, Daniel and John. So when you compare that with notes that still survive in the National Archives, you'll see that they're referring actually to a man by the name of Daniel Brazil of Ballinamrana, who died in 1545. And that, I'll just go back to that equates with the lands that were given to John Madden in Killorn. So we know that the Maddens, the cedar line from 1650s down to Brazil there, were actually living as reduced landowners, we'll say actually, in much more reduced circumstances, in an area called Whyte in the parish of Killorn, within what was formerly O Madden's territory. So over succeeding generations, the leading line declined in wealth and position, and by the early 1800s, the head of the O'Maddens was Ambrose Madden, the eldest son of Basil Madden of Ballinamrana or Whyte. So you'll see here in red, we've highlighted Ambrose, the son of that Brazil who died in 1745. His eldest son, I don't know, am I speaking too fast by the way, or can you hear me at the back? Is that okay? Ambrose settled his estate on his grandson because his eldest son died during his lifetime. So he settled his estate in 1791 on that grandson there, that individual at the bottom, Ambrose. You can see him described there as Streamstown. So why is Ambrose called as Streamstown when we know the rest of the family were associated with Walshtown? Well, in 1810, Ambrose married Anne Cunnis, the daughter of Walter Cunnis of Streamstown near Clifton over in Connemara in West Galway. And he settled at the Streamstown house, renting that house from his in-laws. That's a huge move. Geographically, you'll see here on the right, Ballinamrana or Walshtown, there is a little blue dot, we'll say. You see, all of a sudden, the leading line of the family move over to West Galway to Streamstown House. And this is the house they lived in. This house still exists and is still lived in by the Cunnis family. And John O'Donovan, writing in the early 1840s, described Ambrose of Streamstown as having 5 sons and 3 daughters. So, a famous or well-known Madden historian, Dr. Thomas Moore Madden, he's a descendant of a junior line descended from the last chieftain. And he took up the story thereafter in an article on the O'Maddens published posthumously in 1902. And he had a brief outline of the sons of Ambrose of Streamstown who were alive in his time and outlined their settlement in the United States of America. So other than the brief details given by Moore Madden, no research appears to have been undertaken to trace the descendants or to identify the present head of the Maddens until now. So when we combine evidence from Irish provincial papers and US records, it is possible to follow the lives of those Maddens just before and just after they immigrated to the United States. So what happened to the Maddens of Streamstown? You'll see this line here of 5 brothers at the bottom, 5 sons of Ambrose of Streamstown. They're the individuals we're going to look at next. Because when Ambrose of Streamstown would die, obviously the senior-most member of the Maddens of County Galway would be the senior surviving of those brothers. So, what happened to the Maddens of Streamstown? The family appear to have lived in a poor financial position in the late 1840s, possibly as a result of the social and economic decline caused by the Great Famine. Ambrose of Streamstown, he had still lived at Streamstown House that we saw earlier on in 1847 with his wife Anne, when she died of typhus fever in that year. And thereafter he moved to a much smaller house on the side of the road in a nearby townland known as Letterdean in Connemara. He died there in 1847. And this house, whilst it might not be the exact house, it's certainly the house was located in this location, and it probably was as small as that because the site is quite tiny. So they certainly seem to have fallen on poorer times. So what happened to Ambrose's 5 sons there that we know went to, we believe went to America? Brazil, the eldest and the head of the family, he rented 240 acres on a small windswept tidal island known as Omi in Connemara in the 1840s, and he was there until the mid-1850s. And he and his wife lived in an isolated house on one side of the island, separated by a lake from the rest of the tenantry and the cluster of, who lived in a cluster of cottages on the other side. And you can kind of see there how bleak and desolate that area is. In the years after the Great Famine, the population of Obi Island almost halved, and practically the tenants' cottages fell into ruin and disappeared. And Brazil, he seems to have emigrated to America soon after some of his younger brothers. His house fell into ruin on Omi Island and no longer survives. He himself died in America in 1867, and he's buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery in the town of Skio, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Allegheny County in New York State. And there will be buried most of the senior members of the Madden family who emigrated to America at that time. As Thomas Moore Madden described Brazil as dying without offspring, the next senior member of the Maddens then, actually, the seniority passed to the next oldest brother of that five, Ambrose Jr. So let's just look then at the remaining four brothers. We know one of them died young. So in 1848, the brothers Walter and John, they immigrated to the United States, and they settled in the state of New York. Unfortunately, John didn't live long. He died still a young man, 21 years of age, of inflammation of the lungs. No children. In that same year, the eldest surviving of the brothers, Ambrose Jr., he joined them in the United States. So despite their position among the minor gentry in Connemara prior to their departure, we now find that the family find themselves among the working class in America. And we see that both Ambrose Jr. and Walter found employment on the railroad. So it's a huge change from the descendants of chieftains you would see here, who would have maintained their estates and lived in reasonable comfort. This particular family had descended to the working class by this time. Ambrose Jr., now the nominal head of the family, he married in 1871, quite late I suppose, at the age of 52. I married at 45 and I thought it was late, but this kind of gives me renewed hope actually it wasn't that late. So when he married at the age of 52, he married a woman of English descent, we just know her first name, Faith. He worked as a foreman for the railroad until his mid-60s, and then in older age, the head of the O Maddens was found working as a labourer, a flagman, a switchman, and a watchman, all for the railroad company, and his wife worked as a teacher. And they rented part of a house on Swan Street in Buffalo City, New York. They had two sons, both of whom would die young. The eldest died in 1900, and the last son, who was an invalid, died in 1905, about the same time as his father. They lived with their parents during their lifetime. They were single, died in their early 20s, and they had no children. So, of all those brothers, we have only one remaining brother left in America, Walter. He was 24 when he went to America. He married Mary Brown, who was the daughter of a gardener of Irish extraction, and the couple lived for a time in a number of New York counties before moving to the town of Skio. So as you see, we compare that, we'll say again, with some of those who managed to maintain their position as significant landholders in Ireland, say, or elsewhere. The idea of the descendant of a last chieftain marrying the daughter of a gardener, say, for instance, at that particular time, or working on the railroad, you're looking at a major change in status by virtue of the decline before they left Ireland and their having to make a living in this new country. So Walter worked in his time as a railroad overseer while in Skio, but he appears, however, to have been able to acquire a 97-acre farm at a place called Knights Creek Road in Skio by 1875, and he described himself thereafter as a farmer. So there's, at the top line there, we see the five brothers, all gone, bar Walter, the top line there. You'll see Ambrose Jr., he had two sons, gone, died young, no children. So the only remaining line we have now, descended from Ambrose of Streamstown, is Walter J., that guy describing himself as a farmer in Skio. And we know that he had 8 children, 4 boys, 4 girls. And I hope you'll forgive me for not also picking out the girls in this. It's not based on discrimination, but obviously at that particular time, the descent was taken through the male line for good or for bad, and so that's just by virtue of that, we just follow that for the moment anyway. So we have the four brothers. the sons of Walter J there. With the exception of the parents, all of those were born in New York. Of the 4 boys, most worked at one time or another as telegraph operators. Of those 4, only 2 married, but only 1 would have children. So you can see that rather than expanding over the generations, the senior line of the Maddens in actual fact has been contracting bit by bit, dying out without offspring in many cases. So we'll just look at those, of those 4, John P. and Walter J. They were the only 2 to marry, and Walter was the only one to have children. This individual here in the photograph is John P. He probably attained the highest, I suppose, position, we'll say, socially, of those Maddens in America in his time. He worked as a telegraph operator, but later a journalist, and he rose, becoming involved in Democratic Party politics, and he rose to a position, a fairly prominent position in politics there in New York, as Deputy Commissioner of Highways in the borough of Queens. Unfortunately, though, he suffered from ill health, and he was forced to leave New York for a more beneficial climate in the West. And before he left New York in 1899, he married a lady by the name of Alice Kane from Middleton in New York, but he died, unfortunately, still a relatively young man, in El Paso in 1901, and his body was brought back to be buried in the family graveyard in Skio. He died, however, as we know, without children. You'll see that photograph there, you see it there beside John P. We've highlighted in red now the only remaining descendant of Ambrose of Streetstown in America, Walter J. When John P.'s brother on the death of John P. in 1901, Ambrose in 1912, and the other remaining brother, Brazil, in 1933, Walter became the senior-most Madden in line of descent from Ambrose of Streetstown. He was the only one of his siblings, as we said, to have children. So we'll just have a quick look at him. He married a lady of Irish descent who was born in New Jersey, a lady by the name of Anna Dolan. He was working as a telegraph operator in 1910 and living in the borough of Richmond in New York with his wife and their 2 young children, Walter, again another Walter J. Madden, and Margaret. They did have another child who died prior to 1910, unfortunately, but later that year they had their last child, another son, John B. Madden. I don't know the cause of death, but it does seem remarkable. It may have been infectious, because Walter Madden and his wife Anna, they both died within a number of weeks of one another, still relatively young, in 1926. And like other members of the family, they were buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery in Skio. So now we're reduced to this small section of what was once quite a large family tree. By the mid-1930s, the only surviving descendant of all the Maddens of Streetstown who immigrated to the United States in the 1800s were these 2 young brothers, Walter J. and John B. Both were living with their Aunt Margaret in Queens in 1940. And at that stage, Margaret was in her 60s, and she was the only surviving member of her siblings. Her nephew Walter J., the eldest, he was 33 years, and he was an insurance salesman in 1940. The younger brother, 29 years old, John B., he was working as a steamship steward in that year. They were both unmarried in 1940, and they had no dependents. Then, of course, World War II broke out. 1941, America entered the war, and both brothers enlisted as privates in the army, the American Army, in the summer of '42. By the following year, both held the rank of sergeant. The eldest brother, however, Walter J., he served as a sergeant in the 4th Operation and Maintenance Regiment of the United States Army. But he died tragically in 1943 at the age only of 37 years at Camp Ellison, Indiana, from injuries received from a car crash. He was unmarried at the time. He's described as he was described in his obituary as having been survived only by his brother, Sergeant John Madden, and an aunt, whom we've come across before, Margaret. And she died in 1954 at the age of 84, and she likewise was buried in the same plot in Skio. So now we're left with only 1 surviving member, and that member, from our comparison of army records and social security numbers, it's clear that Sergeant John B. Madden survived the war. He was released from the army on the 10th of October 1945. And here we come to the fate of the only surviving great-grandson of Ambrose Madden of Streamstown in Connemara. He appears to have worked for a time on the railroad after the war, at least prior to 1951, and he appears at one stage to have lived in the state of Florida, with a postal box number address at Lake Worth, Palm Beach County in Florida. We know very little about him, other than that, except that John B. Madden died of natural causes, aged 79 years, in Indian River County, in the state of Florida, in June of 1990, relatively recently. It's unclear, to me at least anyway, if he was aware of his ancestry. If he was aware that that ancestry that could be traced back in an unbroken line to Monya Moore, who Joe touched upon, chief of a tribe of people who established themselves as the dominant group in the southeastern region of Connacht by the end of the 5th century. It's also unclear if he was aware that he was the senior-most descendant of the last Gaelic chieftain of O'Madden's country, and that he may have been in his time, in line of descent certainly at least, the head of the O'Maddens. It's also unclear if he was the last of his line. If he had no male line, no male issue, then, if we follow the same pattern of inheritance at least, then the next senior-most member of the name would actually be a descendant of an early 18th century Madden of a much junior line. If, however, he was married and had a son in the United States, then although the office of the Chief Herald of Ireland no longer continues the practice of recognising chiefs of the name, it is possible that that son, or his son, may currently be, in line of descent, certainly entitled to be called the current head of the O'Maddens. So, a lot of that research was done as part of a website I was doing actually back in, I think it was 2014 or sometime around then. I haven't had much of a chance to update it or continue it since then. I just got caught up on other things. But just only in the last month, I actually looked up the email address attached to that website, and by pure chance, after Christy had asked me to do the talk, I came across some guy in America whose name I just can't remember now, and is very good to go to the rounds of doing the research, and I haven't got back to thank him yet, and I certainly will. But he believes, having looked up at the records in America, that John B. Madden was John Birchman Madden, having died, let's say, if you're looking at the time he died and all the other details. He believes that his wife survived him. He came across the obituary, I believe, of John Birchman Madden, which says that he died, survived by his wife and 5 stepsons, which would be the sons, obviously, of his wife. And I do believe that certainly John B. Madden married quite late in life, which would support that. I haven't had a chance to go through the details with that chap who discovered that, just to confirm that for 100%. But if we accept today for the moment that it's possible that John B. Madden is John Birchman Madden, and that he died with only stepsons, and we see him down here at the bottom, John B. Madden died 1990. And if there's no sons, that whole line who emigrated to America is extinct. Right back to that senior man there, you'll see in the second line, Ambrose, who settled his estate in Walshtown in the parish of Kilordan on his grandson in 1791. So we actually have to go back, if John B. Madden had no children, which we think he hadn't, we actually have to go back to Brazil Madden of Ballinamrana, or Walshtown as it's known, whose will was dated 1745, to find another son who would be the next senior in line, who was senior in his line. All I can say is this is our last slide, so you'll be delighted to know it won't go on for much longer. We're getting closer to the pub. But Daniel, we believe, according to that historian we mentioned, Thomas Moore Madden earlier on, who wrote I think 1902 and died around then, he said that Daniel, the second son of Brazil Madden, died without issue. There's 2 other sons there, 2 other brothers, we'll say, John and Edward. John is the only Ambrose, Daniel and John are mentioned in the will of Brazil. The only person who actually says that Edward actually was a son of this Brazil was Thomas Moore Madden. But we have nothing else to substantiate it. It certainly isn't mentioned. He certainly isn't mentioned in his father's will for some reason. It seems a bit odd. So certainly, if John B had no children, it looks like the next senior man then would have been John of Kiltiernan, County Wicklow. And he, oddly enough, was the grandfather of that man, that historian, Thomas Moore Madden, a medical doctor, whose son was a very famous historian by the name of Dr. Richard Madden, Richard Moore Madden, that's right. Now, so we'd have to look to his line to see, has he senior descendants? If not, there's some doubt about whether if Edward was a son of Brazil, there's some doubt as to whether he had male descendants or not. Somebody contacted me some time ago saying that they were descended from him, and if so, there could be a case to be made there. But if that isn't the case, we'd actually have to go back even further to Brazil Madden himself, who died in 1745. We don't know if he had brothers, but there is, oddly enough, I came across a record in the Registry of Deeds to an individual by the name of Charles Madden, who lived in a place called Killaltra in County Roscommon, and it does show that he had an interest in something like 15 acres of land in the townland of Whyte town at the same time that Brazil was alive. He may have been really connected, we don't know yet. That's all, I'm afraid, has to be discovered yet. All I can do is leave you with the fact that it looks like this man is extinct, this line is extinct. The new line may be from here, John, but as Christy Quinn suggested that I give the talk today, he suggested that perhaps the best thing to do would be to take it to where the research is at the moment, and perhaps rather than the Burke following it up on traditional enemies, I believe actually of the man, it's actually nothing personal. I hope we get a pint out of it still, despite all that later on. It would be lovely if a Madden actually took it up from here and traced the line of the senior line anyway of the chieftain of the O'Maddens. And perhaps I'll leave it with that. I'm sorry for going on so long. I hope you enjoyed the night, and thank you very much.